Hello, welcome to this webcast, HospitalGown, the Backend Exposure, Putting Enterprise Data at Risk. It looks like we've got a great turnout. Welcome customers and prospects, and some competitors. Thank you all for taking the time for this presentation. I'm Jill Richards, Head of Marketing at Appthority. Appthority is a mobile security company that's been helping the Global 2000 secure their data, privacy, and mobile use since 2011. And today we'll be sharing the findings of our mobile threat team with you related to a very large data exposure from a vulnerability that Appthority researchers discovered and dubbed HospitalGown. So we're going to walk you through this hidden risk to enterprise data and introduce you to the Appthority Mobile Threat Protection Solution that defends against this and other threats to enterprise mobile security. Joining us today are two of Appthority's finest, Domingo Guerra, President and co-founder of Appthority, and Seth, Director of Security Research for Appthority. Both are very knowledgeable about securing enterprises from mobile threats, and I'm pleased to introduce you to them. We'll be taking questions at the end, so during the presentation, go ahead and enter questions in the space provided on your screen. Okay, I think that wraps up the housekeeping, so let's get started. Domingo, I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you, Jill. So, when we think about mobile security, a lot of folks think about malware, data exfiltration, other kind of privacy invasive behaviors, and usually folks focus on applications, networks, and devices. However, we started seeing that a lot of the applications are collecting increasing amounts of user data and company data and sending them to third parties. Among those third parties, we saw an increased use of third-party backend and databases that proliferated across a large number of apps. So as part of our security research, we wanted to find out how well these backends are protected, because ultimately, that's where most of the sensitive data was being hosted. And even if the device is protected, any vulnerabilities or weaknesses in backend could expose large amounts of data. So we know that mobile apps are routinely sending data to cloud and data stores, and we identified a few popular ones like Elasticsearch, Redis, MongoDB, and we found that many of these servers were lacking basic security. They were open to the internet, so anyone could log in and see a complete database filled with user data, company records, and other sensitive information. So more shockingly is that we found that these backends were linked to otherwise properly secured applications. So even though Apple and Google are doing an increasingly better job of reviewing apps that go into their app stores, we found that this was a huge blind spot into security and overall security for mobile applications. So I'm going to have Seth, Director of Security Research, explain really the vulnerability in detail, how we found it, and the implications behind it.
Hi, everybody. This is Seth. So we call this vulnerability HospitalGown, where the backend data store for the application is exposed. This is the largest enterprise mobile data leak we've ever found to date, with terabytes of data exposed. This data leak wasn't caused by malware, it didn't require a man-in-the-middle attack, and it isn't expensive or time-consuming to create. The full access to an app's data store, without credentials needed, exposes a lot of critical data and PII. This can be used for further network reconnaissance against the user or enterprise, or to create a detailed spear phishing attack against the user. This is also a huge blind spot for the enterprise. If the data is encrypted in transit, then there's no way to see what data is being sent and ultimately exposed without any deep app and network analysis. Unsecured data stores aren't a new threat. We decided to do a deep dive analysis to see how this affects enterprise mobile users specifically. So we scanned the internet for open data stores. In particular, we focused on Elasticsearch because of its common use, and then we correlated that data with our app's dynamic analysis results to trace the data leaks back to specific applications we've seen on customer devices. We added to this, as part of our app analysis system, a component that scans backend data stores that apps connect to to determine if they are properly secured. With over 21,000 open data stores found, with over 43 terabytes of data exposed, we traced that data leakage back to over 1,000 apps that we found on customer devices. We couldn't look at all of those apps, so we focused on 39 in particular that looked relevant to enterprises for manual analysis. Out of all of these apps, we selected 2 that highlight different data leakage scenarios for case analysis. The first scenario is when apps properly connect to a data store using a secured front-end API, but they still leave the back-end exposed. That's the HospitalGown vulnerability. The second case study is the worst case scenario, when apps directly connect without authentication or encryption to that data store, the back-end still being exposed. Our first case study focuses on PulseSecure, which is a security application. We found that while their app was communicating securely with their Elasticsearch server hosted on AWS, that server was still exposed to the internet, and it revealed a large amount of customer information. We worked with Pulse to disclose the data breach and to verify that the problem was solved. They were very quick to respond to us, and they had the vulnerability closed almost immediately. So they were really great to work with and really concerned about their security. Here's an example of the data we found from their app on their unsecured backend server. You can see that there's a lot of PII in there. There's names, there's phone numbers, there's email addresses, device hardware and carrier information, and other things like VPN reset tokens and password lengths. This data came from a number of companies where this data breach is especially serious. There are power and communications infrastructure companies, courts, and military contractors. We found almost 8 gigabytes of data open on this one data store alone. We sampled only 35 megabytes, about 0.5%, because we really wanted to be sensitive with this exposed data. We didn't just want to download it all and cause a full breach. In our sample alone, we found over 100 companies represented, over 1,000 people in this data breach, and with the information of the sort that you saw on the right previously. The second case study is the worst case scenario, when an app connects directly to an unsecured data store, maybe not even using encryption. We focused on multiple apps from Jacto, a global maker of farm equipment. Think really big autonomous tractors and sprayers. These apps sent data about these agricultural vehicles directly to their server, unencrypted, and we found almost 4 gigabytes of data exposed. This includes vehicle information, including telemetry, things like location, waypoints, and speed, and specific details about the farm equipment like spray capacity. This also included customer, partner, and government agency data from 10 countries using this equipment. It's quite a lot of data exposed. A particularly troubling thing about this data loss is that we weren't the first to find it. We found evidence in the Elasticsearch data store hosted on their site that the data had already been collected and ransomed at least twice. This is a known pattern of ransom attacks with a ransom note left to detail where to send payment in Bitcoin. We found 2 of these notes in their data store, and they seemed like they had been there for quite some time. We notified Jacto with the same process that we notified the other 38 apps that we manually analyzed, but unlike in our previous case study with Pulse, we never heard back from Jacto. After quite a while, we noticed that they'd found and removed the ransom notes in their unsecured data store. However, the last we checked, the data in their data store was still unsecured, still public, and still accessible to anybody on the internet without any sort of authentication or credentials. So what do you do to protect yourself against HospitalGown? It's particularly tricky because it's not tied to specific app versions, and you can't necessarily see the data breach as it's happening unless you're intercepting encrypted traffic. In almost all of the apps that we looked at, the data was encrypted in transit, so it was not easy to spot unless you're actively man-in-the-middling your own traffic. So we recommend that you know the apps in your environment, know what data they're collecting, where they're sending it. Because of the data collection overreach of many apps, reducing the attack surface is the best first step. From there, you need to learn where the data is stored and whether those data stores are secured. And if they're not, reaching out to the app developers and demanding that they be secured is a reasonable step. Finally, we recommend that you use a mobile threat defense solution that includes back-end scanning for identification of potential big data leaks like HospitalGown. And with that, I'll hand back over to Domingo.
Thank you, Seth. So what makes HospitalGown so dangerous? I think the biggest point is that it's a massive data loss. If we think of traditional malware where it's attacking one targeted person at a time, your attack surface is really one endpoint at a time. Also with man-in-the-middle, you can target a certain Wi-Fi spot, for example, and then try to intercept traffic there. But with this kind of vulnerability, you're attacking the data store, where you're seeing everyone's data there, not just one individual user, but all of an app's list of users, all of their confidential information, all of their PII, all of their corporate information in one repository. So it's massive amounts of data. Second is the lack of visibility, both from the risk and the data loss. Here, the users don't know this is happening. They downloaded an app from the App Store. The app is properly encrypting all the traffic and then sending it to a third-party backend, and that's where it's exposed. There's lack of visibility from the enterprise. Again, unless they have a mobile threat defense solution that does back-end analysis, then companies don't know an issue like HospitalGown is live on their mobile devices. And third, it's also lack of visibility for the app vendor. App vendors are increasingly using third-party SDKs, software developer kits, ad networks, or other libraries, and also increasingly using third-party back-end tools. Here, there was no actual breach required. No one had to break into the back-ends. The back-ends were simply less exposed. So other than the Jatco example where there was a ransom note left, none of these vendors even knew that the data had been accessed. So it's a complete lack of visibility from every party involved. And third, there's a huge risk of secondary attacks. If we think about targeted spear phishing and wiring hole attacks, you're able to craft these kinds of messages with a lot more information given the types of data found with the HospitalGown type of vulnerabilities. For example, if I know a user's name, phone number, and email, as well as that of their colleagues, I can easily craft an email pretending to be one of their colleagues, and the user is more likely to open that email and click on any links that I'm sending to them. So again, the best defense is to have a strong mobile threat solution that can identify not just app, device, and network risk, but also back-end vulnerabilities. So how can you do this? You really need visibility on every stage of the chain. One, from the mobile apps, how they behave, how they access and store sensitive information, but more importantly, where they're transferring sensitive information and whether that data store, like Elasticsearch, is properly secured. You also need visibility into how well that data store can be accessed, whether there's a firewall or some sort of authentication required, and whether anyone in the internet can access that. So we've expanded mobile threat protection from Appthority to not only focus on the device, apps, and networks, but also focus on the back-end data stores and make sure all of that data is properly protected. So how do we do that? We've always been the leaders in static dynamic analysis for both apps, devices, and now networks. But now we've also included a new back-end analysis which will look at the data stores that are hosting sensitive data and make sure they're properly protected. This enables you to have a complete mobile security strategy where prevention and detection are key, but also remediation. Prevention is increasingly important, especially in an issue like HospitalGown, because the only way to prevent this issue from happening is to look at apps before they get deployed. Again, remediation in the case of HospitalGown, it's not just about eliminating the app from the user's device, because that data would already be in the back end that's exposed. So you can't really do much to remediate that after the fact. That's why it's so important to be able to have a proper preventative step and allowing employees to search for new apps before they download them, making sure those apps meet corporate security standards, and making sure those backends are going to be protected. Again, once you catch an issue, it might be too late to prevent the data leak. That data might already be exposed. So what are some companies doing to protect themselves against mobile threats? One of the first things that we saw across the large enterprise landscape is the rapid adoption of EMMs like MobileIron, AirWatch, Citrix, and increasingly Intune from Microsoft. These are great solutions for device management and access control to corporate email and even corporate Wi-Fi. However, we've seen that this alone is not a complete mobile security strategy. Both Gartner and the Department of Homeland Security have stressed that EMM is not alone, not enough. So we see EMM as a foundational layer for mobile security, but that's just the first layer. The second layer needs to come in the form of mobile threat protection. That helps you automate mobile threat intelligence, have actionable threat intelligence that you can automate again with your EMM, and more importantly, provide enhanced data security and user privacy as well. This allows you to take advantage of automatic malware and zero-day detection, enhanced data leakage prevention, and mobile network threat protection as well. So really you need both of the arms working together, the device security and the device layer, and then the mobile threat intelligence layer provided by mobile threat protection. So how does this work? We're able to then look for malware and stop zero-day attacks. On average, we see users are installing over 12 apps per month, even more if you can count all the different versions that they're downloading. Now, we've seen that both Apple and Google are doing a very good job of preventing malware from the App Store in general, but we still see malware in the App Stores from time to time. How we address this is we're collecting and analyzing hundreds of thousands of apps, both free and paid, across iOS and Android, running full static, dynamic, and now back-end analysis through all of these apps, and monitoring how these apps behave, how they handle data, and whether they have any kinds of threats for the users. More important than malware, in my opinion, is preventing data leak. Again, malware often catches the headlines, but if we look at data across mobile devices in the enterprise, less than 1% of devices see malware. However, almost 80% of devices fall into threats across mobile data leak. If we think of the traditional software model, we used to purchase software from large companies like Oracle, Microsoft, SAP, and Adobe. Now, most of the software comes in the form of mobile apps, and most of these apps are downloaded for free. So developers have to find a way to monetize, pay for new content and new updates. And the way they do so is by gathering increasing amounts of sensitive information, like users' location, device IDs, address books, calendars, etc. Then all of this sensitive information is transferred from the application to not just the app developer, but to multiple third parties in the form of libraries, SDKs, and data stores, as we discovered with HospitalGown. So being able to identify which apps have access to which sensitive information, whether that information is properly protected on the device, in transit, and also in the back end, is a very important step in complete mobile threat protection. Finally, we also have to protect users from mobile network threats. We know that our users are not just working from the office or working from home. They're working from anywhere. So they're connecting to unknown Wi-Fi networks in airports, in coffee shops, and in hotels. And we've seen an increasing amount of mobile threats coming in the form of mobile threats or man-in-the-middle attacks. So we're able to now identify rogue networks, active attacks, but also country source designation. Where is your data going? This is increasingly important with compliance concerns such as GDPR out of Europe, where we're able to now monitor where apps are collecting data from and where they're sending data to. So now you can write policies to alert you when sensitive data goes to Russia, China, or other countries, for example. So what does Appthority do? At a high level, we're giving you real-time threat visibility across all of your mobile threats. We look at high-level risk incidents across device, apps, and networks. We look at high, medium, low risk evolution in your enterprise over time. And also new from Appthority is actionable mobile threat intelligence. Our mobile threat research team, again, like the work that Seth has been doing, gets pushed live updates directly to your product, so you're able to see if any of the new discoveries, such as HospitalGown, zero-day malware attacks, or vulnerable OSs, are impacting your enterprise. Not only are you notified if those threats are live in your environment, but you're able to take automatic actions to remediate this threat by working with the employee and the EMM to take that action. Again, if we think of something as large as mobility, where every employee has at least one device, and every device has at least 100 apps updating all the time, it's really important to have automation as part of the solution. Also, it's important to have employees be part of the solution and not just a liability. So Appthority MTP has this dashboard for your administrators, but a simplified dashboard for each employee that lets them monitor their on-device risk and give them advice as to how to fix issues in a step-by-step manner so that we don't create extra workload for the security and IT teams in your corporation, and instead have employees fix their own security concerns and stay proactive about learning threats ahead of time. So how do you do that on a mobile security at scale? It's actually been simplified for you. We let you set your security policies. Again, these are going to be across devices, networks, and apps. And these can be either tailored due to your compliance and regulatory concerns that are vertical specific, or based on data handling concerns you might have internally, or you can just use our default policies that are best practices recommended from our mobile security team. Next, you sync your application inventory to Appthority, and that's a very strong API integration we have with all the top EMMs. We have a long-standing relationship with MobileIron and AirWatch and the top EMMs, and we've been the first security partner they've had since 2011. So we really are able to leverage that automation to keep device inventory and app inventory in real time, but also set remediation policies and actions in real time. And third, you can enjoy automated risk protection of Appthority mobile threat protection across your growing mobile fleet. As next steps, I'd invite you to discuss mobile risk concerns with an Appthority expert. Please feel free to schedule some meeting with us, and also see if you can qualify for a complimentary app risk analysis report. An app risk analysis report is a powerful way to see your mobile threat exposure without having to deploy any agents or any actions. All we do is take an application inventory, export directly from your EMM, MobileIron AirWatch, for example. You'll be able to export a CSV file with all of the apps and all of the versions in your environment. And from there, we'll run it through our powerful engine with static, dynamic, and now backend analysis to see if you're exposed to HospitalGown, see if you're exposed to other mobile threats like malware, data leakage, and then give you a free report based on that threat so you and your team can make an informed decision of how to move forward. With that, I'd like to open it up to any questions, and thank you again for participating in this webinar. Our first question is asking if these apps are malicious versions of the company apps. So the first question, so are the apps malicious versions of companies' apps? Won't my malware software detect this? Seth, do you want to take that question?
Yeah, sure. I'll take that. So in all of the cases that we looked at, the 1,000 apps that we found on customer devices, none of them were actually malware. They were real apps that were collecting data for a legitimate purpose. In many cases, they were overreaching on what data they collected, and they were all sending that data to a third-party server, which was then exposed on the back end. No malicious activity, more of just inattention to security details on the part of the app developers and infrastructure maintainers. And that's why antivirus and malware detection will not find this threat, because it's not malicious, it's not malware, it is just poor security practice.
Thank you. The next question, how is that app communication is secure, but the back end is not? Seth, do you want to take that one as well?
Yeah, so that builds on my last description of how the data is being leaked. If an app is communicating with a server that is collecting this information for a legitimate purpose, that connection may be encrypted. So the data in transit is protected by TLS or other sorts of encryption mechanisms, but once the data gets onto that data store and is now at rest, it can be accessed from anyone, anywhere, without credentials, and it is not encrypted in storage.
Thank you. The next question, how would I need to deploy the Appthority mobile app to detect this problem? I'll take that one. So overall, you need mobile threat protection to be able to detect issues like HospitalGown. Again, your EMM vendors like MobileIron and AirWatch can let you know an application inventory, which is a list of all the apps deployed on your devices, but they don't provide the threat intelligence or the security to identify issues like HospitalGown. When you deploy Appthority on top or next to your EMM, you're able to then leverage the app inventory collected from your EMM, but add the mobile threat intelligence that Appthority brings to the table. And how that works is that it's monitoring apps installing your devices, as well as different versions in real time. And every time there's a new app installed or a new version, you're able to do static, dynamic, and back-end analysis to detect this issue. Further, if you want to be proactive, you can deploy the Appthority mobile app. And that's a tool for employees to be able to self-help, self-manage, and self-remediate. And what that allows you to do is to be proactive, so employees search for an app before they even install it. They see if that app has any risk or vulnerability, and if so, they don't download the app. And that really is the only way to protect yourself against this kind of exposure. Because again, if you detect an issue like HospitalGown after the fact, you can prevent new employees from downloading it, but unfortunately, all the employees that already use that app, their data is already exposed in the company back end. So even if you delete the app from the user device, their data is still exposed on those servers, on those back ends. So that's why we say that proactive security is really the best security you can have. I think that's it in terms of the questions that we've received. I'd like to thank everyone for participating and attending the webinar. Please be sure to contact us with any questions and schedule a follow-up meeting, and we'll be happy to provide with more information on HospitalGown and other mobile threats, as well as your complimentary app risk analysis report. Please visit us at appthority.com, and you can email us at sales@appthority.com or reach us at @appthority on Twitter. Thanks again. Have a great day.